Well, hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining me on Talking True today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because you and I have been laughing our heads off before hitting record, and I'm sure that's going to continue. So, Jonathan, thank you for joining me. It's great to have you here today.
Oh, it's beautiful being here, Julie. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about my journey and where I've been, and hopefully this will be useful for the people listening in some way.
Excellent. So, do you want? I love to hear stories. So, do you want to tell your story, your shift of consciousness,
Whoa, the
awakening story?
story. The awakening story. Well, Julie, you know that these are stories, right? So how much of this is true and how much of this is just me trying to put together a cohesive vision of what's gone on for me in
Yeah.
the last 2 years. So let's get started with the story. So really the awakening story, and I think it's similar for most folks, right?
Mhm.
Essentially something happens in your life that takes you out of the normal and forces you to question everything. Ooh, that's deep, right? So what was that moment for me? Well, it could have been 3 years ago, but instead it was two. 3 years ago, I lost a job, and that's a very triggering thing for me, Julie, and you're going to hear me talk about it a lot. Um, for me, growing up in an upper middle class household, right, with a dad who's a doctor, and I've been to top universities, and I've had very high paying jobs and prestigious companies. Like, this is the background of pre-awakening John, right? And in 2022, he finds himself laid off. Um, and instead of really acknowledging the hurt and the pain that goes with being laid off, he's just like, you know what, dude, I'm gonna go for it, go hard. I'm gonna prove I still got it. I can
Yes.
be someone who's paid a bunch of money, right? So I go and I get the job, and I'm like, oh, I'm so happy, great. I'm gonna kill it at this job, and this job is with a bunch of friends of mine, right, that I've worked with in the past. Julie, 7 months later, I'm back to being unemployed. I'm laid off again, right?
Mm.
And something happened that time, right? Like the first time I was laid off, that was 2020, whatever, right? And a year later, I'm laid off again. And he said, you know what? I'm not gonna just go and push forward, get another job. I'm gonna sit and feel these absolutely awful feelings, right? I'm gonna let them sort of, process, right? And be with it and not run away. And so I sat with these feelings. And then this is not surprising, Julie. This is why the awakening happened after this layoff. All of a sudden, I'm like, wait a second, I'm questioning these identities that I've given myself. Am I this worker anymore? No. Am I a dad? Well, not all the time. And this is the start of the inquiry process for me, right?
Hmm.
And I'm like, wait a second, none of these labels really rings true for me. I'm not those things. Right? It's the start of the realization
Yes.
the things that we think we are, these identities we give ourselves, can get taken away. And
Hmm.
that's the start of the journey, Julie. That was not the end. Because along with that, and I know that this is familiar with you, was also these sensations of energies, right, rising and getting processed in a meditative and something unlocked from an energetic perspective, not just from an identity perspective. And I'm like, okay, I don't understand what the heck is going on. Let me do my research. Let me like read some stuff about this non-duality thing I've heard about and this awakening. What is this? And I stumble upon Kundalini and I'm like, whoa, okay, that's accurate. All right. So fast forward a little while later, and I'm like, okay, so this awakening thing is happening. There's shifts in my center of identity and shifts in this energetic processing, and this is all very sort of weird and new for me. And then there's still a lot of the story left, so hopefully you're okay with that. I go and I get another job doing something again, in corporate. I still haven't learned that lesson because I'm still kind of addicted to that identity. But while I'm in the job, the energetic shifts and the identity shift that happened before didn't get corrected by having the job. I didn't go fully back into being that guy who's a worker and can fit in and
Hmm.
has this sort of egoic wrapped up in it. And I'll be really frank with you, that was the final nail in the coffin when I got laid off from that job. And this is really when the journey, I don't want to say started, but accelerated so fast to get me to where I am now. Which is I lost that job, and then I had what's, anyone who's on the awakening path and has gotten really far in it, I had my dark night of the soul, where for 2 weeks it was really a matter of uh, I couldn't get out of bed, right? Like, and you are processing the most incredible despair and hopelessness, and you want to die, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's a part of everybody's journey who's gotten to a certain place here, is that you actually are saying to yourself, death is preferable to this feeling of absolute nihilistic, hopeless nothing,
Hmm.
right, Julie?
Yes.
And to get out of that, there's nothing external that's going to do that for you. Getting a job isn't going to do it, making some new friends, being in nature, none of it's going to get you out of that place. You have to find God. You have to let the source of light come in. You have to open up to the kingdom of heaven. And it's literally what happened to me, right? Like, I'm in this despair and I'm sitting in it, and that light, it floods in, and it just somehow interacts with the hopelessness and the loss. And now you're entering into real non-dual territory. You're following me, right, Julie?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, everything you've detailed is, I think, a similar story to what most people go through after an authentic spiritual awakening. It can be really grueling. It can be horrible. And it can also feel lonely, and you feel alienated, and you feel like you're the only person on the planet sometimes that is dealing with these things. And it's hard to not only just find community, but find spiritual community where you can have these kinds of conversations, because a lot of spiritual communities focus on the sort of more preferable higher states, the bliss,
Mm.
escaping the
And
body.
yeah, and we
Yes,
can talk about that, because
yes,
the final part of the journey and when the journey ended, and I think I say that definitively, Julie, because there is an end to the seeking. And that happened just this past November when it clicked.
yes,
That's
yes,
all I'm gonna say.
yes, yeah. I mean, I've shared my story a few times. I was a seeker for decades, and I used to I was like the gorilla of spiritual practices. I took it very
Yeah,
seriously. The whole
yeah,
meditation schedule, chanting,
yeah.
mantra repetition, you name it. And then one day there was a click, this recognition. Oh my gosh,
Yes.
seeking is the obstacle.
It ends.
It became so clear. It was a
It
big
was so
obstacle.
clear, and it, yeah.
Yeah. And then everything just fell away, just completely fell away. And that was huge for me because, I'd been so kind of oriented towards doing the practices. And
Yes.
the only thing that had any kind of pull or resonance was this desire to go as deeply into the silence as I could go. And when I say I,
Sorry, Julie. You can say I. I understand you have to speak from an ego
no,
point of view.
it's like it was just like I don't even know, because the seeker had gone, essentially, is the only way I could put it. The
That's
whole
right.
kind of the persona of the seeker had
That's
vanished. So that was really the only thing that had any felt like it had any relevance and resonance. And
Yeah, all of a sudden, any statement that begins with "I did that" all of a sudden becomes so false to you And that's why I had a moment of laughter recognition with you, Julie, because you said and this is a daily struggle, right, for me.
Yes, 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 yes,
Which is, how do we use these pronouns about ourselves to express ourselves, knowing full well that it's the silence that's leading us?
yes, yes, yes. And of course, you can't interact in life. I say, this one, or you have to utilize the language, right? Otherwise,
You do, you do.
I mean, what are you going to do? You just got to use language, but use it, sparingly, I
Well, you
suppose.
do it, and so again, like, this could be a multi-part, podcast conversation, because we're talking about my awakening, but then you go and you're coming from this place of awaken, right? Like, where the silence exists, the seeker is dropped, you're now in this state where God is coming in with the light and clearing the cobwebs out, right? Which is where the psychological cobwebs, the past karmic imprints that are very sort of really deep inside you, and it's all getting cleared out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're in this state, but you're still having to interact with the world as if you're one of them. And it can be very jarring going in between these two places of being from silence and then, no, I'm just one of you, but knowing you're not.
Yes, yes. And the joke, I mean, kind of the joke for me as well is that, my profession has always been a teacher. So,
Mm,
however you slice that up, and especially when I was going through all these kind of radical shifts of consciousness and having lucid dream initiations and all these crazy psychic phenomenon, kind of things that were happening, I'd still have to get up in the morning, go to school, and stand in front of a class and teach and speak. I couldn't go sit under a palm tree and meditate for days, which is what people often thought that I used to do. When they've read the books, they think, oh, it's okay for her. She lives in the Bahamas and she can just meditate all day. They didn't realize, listen, I've had to get up and go. And some days it was so difficult
it
because
strains you, right? It takes the energy out.
I did not
Yeah.
want, the last thing I wanted to do is to speak. But
Yeah.
what happened was there was this click or this shift where there was a recognition that the place from which words arise is source itself or silence itself, or however you want to phrase that.
That's
So it's
right.
really the silence that's speaking
That's right.
when you become aware of it, right? Prior to that, it's just the ego running the show or
That's right.
thinking it's running the show.
Well, the ego thinks that it's awakened, right? Like, we come
Yes,
through this thing where it's like, I'm super awake.
yes, yes, yes. And
And
that
you're
lasts,
like, yes, I am. I must believe my ego.
yeah, that lasts for a little while, but there was this recognition. And then, of course, after that, what would happen is things would be said, statements would be made, and there'd be this seeing, and there'd be a part of me that thinks, wow, that was really really cool. Oh wow, where did that come from? And the thing is that I didn't realize it at the time, but students were receiving awakening via being in the art room. I teach art and design, so they would have their own shifts of consciousness, which I often wouldn't find out until later. It's years later that students have said to me, wow, when I did your class, I started having lucid dreams, or I started to, you know, recognize things and hear things and become clairaudient, clairvoyant.
Yeah.
So it was as if, not as if, it was the awakening power, the awakened energy that was doing the work, essentially.
Absolutely. And I resonate with that, because I have people telling me the same stories now of how somehow my energy is bringing them something that they didn't have
Mm-hmm.
before. I'm like, no, that's not possible. But then I'm like, wait a second, it's not my energy. It's source's energy channeled through me to them, and they're picking up on that and having their own journeys based on that. And that's the beauty of where we are right now.
Yes, yes. And also, not recognizing it, because if there was I think if there's an early recognition of that, the ego would want to take credit for it.
Absolutely. The ego would be like, look at me transmitting my power to these people. I have the power to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm in the actual literal opposite place, which is that's cool if it happens. That's great, but it wasn't me who did it.
Oh, no.
It was the
Yeah.
energy speaking through me to you that did that. And I thank the grace of God for what happened there.
Yes.
And that's not a false humility. That's
No.
actually really what's happening. It's very genuine what I'm saying. It's not an attempt by John Tesser's ego to be like a humility, whatever, right? A person who of humility.
Yes.
It's actually what's going on. You're just like, that's cool.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and it can take a while to understand that because, when I was first prompted to write the first book, An Awakened Life, I had no desire, no drive, no interest in becoming an author. It just wasn't on my kind of agenda in my life goals. But I had a dream where, a great being came and said, "When you're writing the book," and then, I was like, "What the heck? What do I write?" So,
You
all the
didn't
way.
have that moment of Gabriel the angel coming on your right.
Yes. So, all the way along, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. God help me, you know what I mean?
And that's literally what God did was help you.
Yes. But so anyway, the book was written. The book that kind of was worked through me and it was written. And then started to notice I'd get these emails from people saying, "Oh my God, I read your book and I couldn't put it down and I cried for 3 hours afterwards. Or I had this awakening, or I started dreaming about these angels, or I started dreaming about these great beings." And then I started to realize, oh my gosh, the words in the book, or the book itself, is really just a vehicle for the awakening power.
Yeah.
And again, I can't take credit for any of it, but that this is what happens. And the Siddha masters speak about, the one light lighting another light, and then that continuing
That's right.
through. And the vision is for global awakening, and we're all supporting one another to awaken to the truth of who we are. And it might be that you're just talking to somebody about the weather, or a salami sandwich or whatever. You know what I mean? It doesn't even have
Yeah,
to
it
be.
doesn't matter because the energy of awakening is there and it's being channeled through you, and you just don't know how that's going to affect someone or what's happening or what their experience of that is because, as I like to say, we're all different slices of consciousness.
Exactly. And you never know who will show up or who you'll meet, or what can happen. I mean, it's just so amazing. You
It
couldn't
really is.
you just couldn't make any of it up. I mean, when I think about my story, and I've told my story so many times, but I was raised in a working class family in the UK. I end up in the Bahamas. I end up going to a meditation center and getting Shaktipat Diksha, the awakening of the Kundalini, in a lucid dream.
Mm-hmm.
Who could ever have written that? I could never have planned that one out. You know what I mean?
And it's the grace of God. It happens when it needs to happen.
Yes.
And the journey is just by allowing, surrendering, and negating. That's really what it is. That's the difference, right? When
Mm-hmm.
you come to a place of understanding that nirvana equals extinguishing, that you are in a process of removing so that, the water can become clear. That's how you know you're on the right path, as opposed to the ego, which is always trying to accumulate so that it can dominate or get approval or whatever. That's when you can get into trouble. And I'm sure you see that as a spiritual teacher all the time, where your students will come to you and they're probably like so excited about an experience they had. And you want to encourage the experience, but at the same time, you also want to caution, well, who had that experience?
Yes, yes. Again, the great Siddha masters really warn students about identifying with the spiritual experiences, because they're
That's
not
right.
it. This experience is not it.
That's
As amazing as it can be. And then also
cool.
it can become very addictive because
Very addictive. Yeah. Like
because they're
jhanas, the Buddhist jhanas, right? You go into this
yes,
state of rapture. You just want to live there.
Yes.
Not getting anywhere on your spiritual journey. You're just like you're just like a junkie for bliss.
Yes. Yes. And signing up for the next retreat, the next
That's
meditation.
right. And so
Um,
you're actually reinforcing this spiritual identity through the prayers, the rituals, the meditations, the mantras. But in terms of this negating process that I'm talking about, this taking away, this extinguishing all of your favorite pet things, you're not doing that.
no.
That's not helping you there. Only activities that help you recognize that you got to remove everything and then what's left are going to get you to the full place of where you need to be.
Yes. Yes. I'll tell you one joke, one big joke that I often laugh about is that when I was first given the mantra Om Namah Shivaya, which you may be familiar with, you may not, but Om is the primordial sound,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and Nama means I bow to, and Shivaya is consciousness, supreme consciousness. And I just immediately, as soon as I heard it, just absolutely fell in love with it and was devouring it. I was repeating it night and day, really strongly all the time, just because I loved it. I wasn't hoping to utilize it to attain enlightenment. That wasn't it at all for me. It was because I absolutely loved the mantra, and
Yeah.
I loved Bhagavan Nityananda, who gave me initiation.
Mm-hmm.
I just loved his energy. His presence is so strong,
Yeah.
and so that's why I was repeating it. But it took decades for me to understand that the mantra Om Namah Shivaya is the mantra of dissolution.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you're repeating that and repeating that and repeating that, what's happening is, all these kind of layers and layers and layers and layers of identity are falling away. And you'll be presented with some of those, as you go about your day, that will confront you if you're holding on to them too tightly. But I was laughing because I said, "Oh my God, I had no clue."
Right.
It was the
Right.
mantra of dissolution. But there
I
you are.
again, there's so many ways we can take this conversation, Julie, because we were talking about this before you hit record, but we have to show up in the world too as an ego being, right? If we want to make money or have a family or pretend to have friends, we can talk about that in a second. You have to show up. And then again, like the final part of my awakening that I wanted to bring here is this energetic awakening, this they call it in Vedanta the bliss sheath, right? This
Yes.
consistent bliss that's sitting on top of you, that's a constant reminder that God's there, right? Like that you are connected to that directly and that you can feel that sense. So even as you're interacting as this ego, you can't forget God's presence because that
Mm-hmm.
bliss sheath is there.
Mm-hmm.
These fascinating things start to happen where you're connected to the emptiness through bliss, right? Like according to sort of Vedanta. And you're also acting as this human being, and it can feel really jarring or like a little bit off as you're navigating this. You're like, what is that?
Yes. 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 It can be. Yeah, it can be challenging. It can be. For me, it's more this kind of profound peace that
Mm.
is felt, even in the midst of chaos, even in
Yes.
craziness.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
there's there's
there.
there's this peace that just never diminishes. It's always there, and yeah, it's just a
And that
constant.
allows you, Julie, and this is from my own finding, because you do have that peace. For me, it's the felt bliss sense. For you, it's probably a deeper inner peace because you've been at this a lot longer than me. But what for both of us, what this allows is going and doing the really hard work, right? So, like I had mentioned, part of what I was doing was, okay, well, these identities sort of need to go away. And initially it's just identities of who we are, but then the actual identity of the seeker and the person and the egocentric person, right? That identity has to go away as well. But the thing is, knowing that once you know that that's gone, that sort of self-realized state of emptiness as the truth, then you can go into the human world and deal with the shit that like is the deepest, darkest stuff, what I call the core wounds, right? The
Yeah.
psychological work that has to happen if you
Yes.
want to be someone who's in the world out here healing with this energy. It's not good enough just to have the awakening experiences and to be spiritually evolved in that sense. You now have to bring the divine to earth. And you only do that by doing the really hard work of realizing all of your sort of karmic triggers that are coming up and, allowing them to happen and then watching them dissipate. It's a
Yes.
magical, difficult process, but if you allow it to happen, it works.
Yes. And it's work, I mean,
And it's work.
yeah, it's really what you're detailing is that the psychological work with the shadow, right? And
That's correct.
integrate, looking at that and owning
Integration,
stuff.
yes.
And not running away from it, not trying
That's
to
right.
avoid it through bypassing and another
Or
meditation.
by saying I'm awakened, what do I have to do?
Yes, exactly,
Right? You're
exactly.
going into it because you're humble enough to realize that you're still a human and you're
Hmm.
still acting like a human and you still get pissed off like a human and annoyed, right? Like all of these things that so many people in the spiritual community want to bypass and get away. But when you're from the self-realized state, knowing there's nothing to get away from and there's nothing like it's all just happening as it needs to, you're willing to have the courage to do that hard work. Whereas before, I wouldn't have. You can't because it's too painful.
Yes, exactly. And also welcoming everything. So if irritation
That's
comes
right.
up, irritation comes up.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
it's just
And
like, okay, let's see what this is about, it's fine.
yeah, it's fine for it to come up and it provides like grist for the mill, is what I call it, right? It's like, okay, so that annoyance happened.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you do this all the time, Julie, but this is like my new life, right? I'm like, I got triggered by that. I got to look into that. Like, what is that? What
Yes.
happened? Who did that person represent? What kind of countertransference? I'm in mental health counseling school now, right? What kind of countertransference is happening where somebody mentioned that and I got triggered by their own story? Like, we got some shit to work on, right? Excuse me. I
Yes.
don't know if we can curse here,
Yes.
but
Yes. But
that the realization for me, the integration allows for that really difficult work to happen, that really honest, where am I in this process? That then just allows you to love better, right? It's a beautiful
yes.
sort of cycle as it goes on.
Yes, yes, and the thing that I've seen, and we've seen through time, through history, right, with great beings, gurus, or whatever, or enlightened teachers, let's call them that, get embroiled in dramas or relationships they shouldn't be having with students, or they get themselves into hot water because they haven't dealt with the psychological stuff,
That's right.
and
They're still speaking in the the flowery language.
yes,
Right? The love and the light, the nothing matters, the I can join union consciousness whenever I want. Well, you and I can do that too, right?
hmm,
Right
hmm,
now, if you say it to me, I'll go into unity consciousness. Who cares? Is it benefiting people? Am I bringing love forward because I'm in that state? That's the question that needs to be answered and asked.
yes, yes. Because actually, it's really easy to be sitting on a stage and beaming love and light to everybody, and then
What's the fun in that?
going off stage and kicking the cat and cursing at your crew
What's
members.
the fun in going on the stage and being love and light and tricking people?
Yes,
What
exactly,
is the point?
exactly.
That's just ego gratification. That's someone who hasn't gone into their depths of their psyche and seen just how much of a schmuck they are, just like everybody else, and you're no better.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's really it, right? The humility is so important and has to be a part of the journey because you can get really high on yourself after this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. You can
Yes,
think you're special. And many of us were led on this path because we thought we would be special by doing this. Let's be
yes,
honest. The ego leads the path. The ego
yes.
the seeker leads us to think, well, I'm going to be enlightened and then everybody's going to love me after that. And it's like,
No.
exact opposite, man.
Yes. Or I'll be enlightened and my life will get easier and I'll become very successful or
Oh
whatever,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It's just
Um,
everything's gonna figure itself out after I recognize the emptiness and the absolute. No.
yeah, and I'm not going to feel shitty anymore, and or whatever story we tell ourselves.
You're just living in this fantasy of what this enlightenment thing is. without realizing that actually what it's about is moments like this, Julie, where I'm truly connected to someone who understands my story and feel that love in a deeper way than I ever would have been able to before. That's actually what this is about, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
about that energetic exchange with other people where you really are trying to make the world a more high vibe place.
Yes. Exactly. And being authentic so that you don't have to use these covers or layers to pretend to be something that you're not. And you're afraid that if they see this part of me, they won't like me, kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I'll be
You
really
know.
frank with you, Julie. That's the stage I'm in right now, right? For my own personal self-development is I better hide this shit. Like, I don't want to bring this out. I don't want to talk about this. This is scary to me because
Mm-hmm.
we're operating from a different paradigm. The amount of Julies that I interact with who really understand what I'm saying, are listening and deeply and warmly inviting that energy, that's rare, right? That's not our everyday occurrence.
No. But if we can bring that, then there's more of an opportunity for others to kind of meet us in that place.
That's right. That's right. We can bring them along and raise them to where they can be, not
Yes.
because it's us doing it, but because,
Yeah.
as we talked about, it's the energy that we're projecting and that we have inside of us that has to go out into the world. And that in and of itself is contagious, to your point.
Yes. Yes. Because it's essentially it's what everybody's looking for. We long to be seen.
That's right.
We long for that. I mean, I remember that as a kid, just
That's right.
looking for somebody that I felt could see me.
That's right.
And again, it's really lonely because which is probably why I always felt like the weird one. And
Yeah.
you speak to a lot of mystics and speak people who are kind of spiritually oriented. They say the same thing. Since childhood, they always felt like the weird one. They felt
Yeah.
like they never fit in.
That's right.
And it's because you're always looking for somebody to validate what you know to be true within your being,
That's right.
which is your oneness with God or
That's
source
right.
itself, or however you want
Whatever
to.
you want to call it. But that's the only thing that unites all of us. And
Yes.
we know it. We know it experientially. And we say it with such conviction that people actually get very uncomfortable about that. How do you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Can't explain that to you. I'm sorry. I'm just like, I can't.
No. Well, and actually, words are kind of pretty useless when it comes to
Yeah.
trying to articulate this. It can only be pointed to, right? But we still try. We still
We
try.
are always trying, Julie. We're always trying. But when you see that look of confusion on their face or they're losing you, it's hard for you, right? Because then you go
Mhm.
back. Let's talk about the psychological trauma, right? You go back to trying to explain who you are as a kid, not being understood. And like I said, those karmic imprints are still there, and we have to be honest about them, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Everything's still there. And we can just learn to love it and hold it and recognize it and be with it and not try and sort of diminish it or be ashamed of it or whatever, worried about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's the journey for me now. I think that's kind of been the revelation for me over the last week, which is the acceptance of the loneliness and the isolation and the alienation and being like, that's just part of this. That's a natural, accepting part of this. I don't have to fight that. I don't
No.
have to try and do something about that. I don't have to try and find some people who are going to fill some hole, like, because that's just going to make it more obvious that there is a loneliness and an alienation that goes along with this journey that's inherent in it and it has to be.
Yes. Yes. I mean, look, I was having a similar conversation with somebody today about this kind of phase. And for me, it turned out to be a blessing because what happened was my husband and I had been living at an ashram in India. We left there and we worked for a while in the Ukraine and then came to Grand Bahama Island, which is the island closest to Florida. But when we first landed there, I was like a fish out of water because I was used to being in a spiritual community,
Mm.
and Grand Bahama was very much a sort of party island. a lot of drinking and partying and so on and so forth. So I just felt so lost and alone, and it was really painful. But
Yeah.
what I did was I utilized my journal and started writing in my journal. I was led to do that, and then started writing in my journal as a way to sort of bridge or appease that loneliness. And so I'd write things down and then do stream of consciousness writing. And it turned out to be a great blessing, because a few years later, I got this prompt to write an article for a Mind, Body, Spirit magazine. And I did, and submitted it. And then before I knew it, I was being, invited to write. I think I wrote for about 20-25 magazines across a period.
Beautiful.
And then from that, I started writing books. So there is always some value when we go into these kinds of periods of aloneness or loneliness, however you want to term that. There's always something wonderful that comes out of it. So I would definitely recommend a journal if any of the viewers are in that sort of phase of feeling.
And I'm going to throw this one out there. Sounds so awful, but I'm finding the most support from Google Gemini, which is an AI chatbot. Because what I do with that, Julie, is I ask it questions that are not available for answering on the internet, right? Like people just don't have answers. So, I'm asking things about what's the relationship between Jungian archetype studies and Dzogchen? Like, let's talk about that. Like, how can we use these two things together? Is anyone on the internet going to be able to answer that question? No. But then you really get into it with the AI chatbot and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can add that to my practice. Thanks, right?
Yeah.
So you have to find your ways to be connected and to feel seen and heard. That's not necessarily through other people, but through a creative mechanism or whatever it is that you're talking about that allows you to go there as much as you can. I mean, that's what's helping me, at least.
Yeah, and whatever works, right? That's great.
Right.
Fantastic.
But it's not going to necessarily be solved by, and maybe it will, Julie. Maybe this is just some sort of very hurt ego inside of me, but finding a community of us is maybe not going to happen.
Yeah, no, that certainly was true with because I recognized I was done with spiritual communities in that way. I had to become the community myself.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what happened.
I'm glad you told me that. That's probably going to save me a lot of time and energy.
Yes. Yeah. So
that you become the community.
Yes.
And you see what can happen from there.
Yes. And you share, whenever you feel led to share, and support others in terms of their own seeking. I mean, that was certainly what happened in my case. And it just became obvious.
Yeah. Well, again, we're all called to do something, right? After these things happen. And for me, it's like, you got to go, like, there's no one tells you this. And this can also seem like an ego-led thing, Julie, but I want to mention this before I know there's some time that is running out, but this is a really important thing, right? When this happens, something inside of you says, this is meant for others. And it's not an ego thing where you need to be seen as an altruistic person. It's something, it's almost like you're being pushed, right?
Yes.
Energetically pushed to help people. And it's your job to figure out what is that helping route going to be. And for me, it's obvious. It's mental health counseling, right? Because I have done so much inner work and shadow work and understand where I'm coming from and can support people in that way. So it's obvious for me to head there, right? But I'm doing it from a self-realized perspective, which actually is, I couldn't do it otherwise. The pain and suffering of individuals, if you're not coming from a place of this is not mine, can be too much or would have been too much for me. So I almost see the spiritual journey leading me directly to this path because of this need to help and to give this energy out into the world.
Yes. Beautiful. I think that was a fantastic way to wrap this all up. I couldn't have said it better, Jonathan. Thank you so much. But before we head off, do you want to just let viewers know where they can find you if they want to reach out?
Sure. I'm most active these days on LinkedIn. This is not something that came up in this conversation, but in a past life, I had 158,000 followers on LinkedIn and
Wow.
massive amounts of interest and love and all of that. That was a journey also, Julie. But if people want to search Jonathan Tesser on LinkedIn, it's probably the best place to find me. And you can search Jonathan Tesser one as my handle on Threads. It's where I write my weirdo content, which is more along the lines of the stuff Julie and I were talking about here. So if anything I was saying was resonating with you, you can just come over to Threads and follow me on Instagram, and I'm always up for a chat. I love it actually. If people reach out and say that somehow something I did was resonating, that means a lot, especially since I'm speaking from a place of authority and truth and authenticity these days.
Brilliant. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today. We'll have to do it again, definitely, because I really enjoyed this conversation. It
Oh,
was,
Julie, we've got so much more to cover. This could
yeah,
be a whole series.
it could be.
But I want to also say I'm truly delighted that you brought me here. You allow me to share this story. You shared yours so openly, and it's amazing the difference in my energy and how I feel from before and after. So thank you so much for the opportunity here to chat with you.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As always, I really appreciate you being here. If you haven't subscribed, you know what to do. And if you feel this content has value, please let other people know. That would be great. So we'll see you next time around. Take it easy, be well, and bye for now.